So she's singing and worship leading, and I'm directing the band. And there was a question I should have asked her that I didn't. So now I'm being harsh with her in the moment because I never clarified what we need as a band and what I need. So instead of me being like, Morgan, come in now, I'm like, Morgan, get it together.
No,
you know what
that's not what I want to do.
And it was dishonoring. It was dishonoring. And she looked at me, I looked around, and everyone was like, Pastor Ryan looked at me, and I was like, what am I doing?
That's so beautiful.
It was a bad leadership moment. It was that's a very
Thank you
small
for sharing
moment,
the practical, that side helps so much to not just assume Treigh and Morgan have it together because they're worship leading.
Definitely not.
Or creatives, have it together because this product, so much of creative can look put together on the outside. But if the process in which it happened was damaging and hurtful, it just becomes non-effective.
Welcome to the AXL Podcast. AXL Creative Co exists to equip and empower sons and daughters to advance the kingdom of heaven through their creative expressions. On this season of the podcast, we'll be discussing our values. So we've gathered leaders from our community to share what they're experiencing through applying these values in their everyday life. Let's jump in.
Hey guys, welcome to the AXL Podcast. Let's all just share our name. My name is Cheyenne.
My name is Chris.
My name is Treigh.
I'm Morganne.
Awesome. We're so excited to be here today. I can't wait to talk with y'all about this value. So in this season of the podcast, we are highlighting our values, and today's value is communication. So we say downshift. We choose to slow down and communicate clearly today so we can move forward faster tomorrow. I absolutely love this value and hate it at the same time, if that's possible. I think it's really important to acknowledge just kind of some of the breakdown of that. We choose to slow down. So there's an active, we have to choose to do it. It's very easy to just go through life and not choose to slow down. And we have to communicate clearly today so we can move forward faster. So we see that communication really is about moving forward, and whether that can be applied in projects or relationships or workplace or whatever that is, it touches every area. So I do want to read a verse and then get kind of into what you guys have to say about communication. So Romans 14:19 says, "So then let us pursue what makes for peace and for mutual upbuilding." So all over scripture, and just as we meditate on communication, I really just kept seeing the common thread of this relationship aspect of a mutual upbuilding. So can you guys talk into that? What do you think about communication in the terms of why is it so relational? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think to communicate effectively with somebody, you have to build relationship with them. And I love in these conversations that we've had, there's always an overlap of we're not just talking about one value. There's always how this value connects with this other value. And so within communication, if there's not trust, then it's going to be really hard to communicate with somebody if you haven't built trust with them already. Or if you're not choosing to trust, if it's somebody new that you're not really familiar with, maybe you're not going to be able to communicate with them if you're going in without trust. And so with building trust, it also builds a relationship. Totally. And from that, then you're able to communicate clearly and get on the same page with somebody. I think that's mainly the goal, specifically with creative projects of wanting to get on the same page. If you're doing a project and if you're either leading people with a project or you're collaborating with people on a project, you want everyone to be on the same page so that somebody's not over here doing something that's not actually productive and working towards the common goal.
Yeah, that's good.
That's so good, man.
Yeah, it's really good.
Unity in the body of Christ and even from us, between us and God, is so important. It's on God's heart. It's in His Word. And I think communication is a big part of that. And when you're working on a project, like you said, with people, with friends, with coworkers, or even working on something with your spouse, good communication breeds unity and intimacy in the relationship. So to say that communication doesn't affect you personally is a lie. And I've learned that through a lot of wins and losses. And I just want to say, I think this is something that Chris does really well, is communicating. And we have a ton of, I think, examples of when it was, when communication was good and when it wasn't. But I can say that my relationship with Chris is better because we've worked on communication and been through moments where it was like we had to clarify.
Yes.
And the downshift prioritizes the relationship so that we can trust each other later. And I also think it's really cool that God does that in his word a lot. Like, he doesn't leave us to assume a lot about him.
Right.
So like, God is always downshifting with us, communicating with us. And I really think it's just a matter of us slowing down. Like, God is always communicating well, and we need to slow down to understand and to communicate effectively. So
yeah,
that's good.
It's really good.
That's great. I actually was asking the Lord, I was like, what do you have to say about communication? I felt like instantly he was like, don't be hasty. And I was like, hasty? I never used that word. So I knew it was the Lord for sure. And I looked up the word haste, and it means acting with excessive speed or insufficient consideration.
Whoa.
And I feel like when we slow down to communicate clearly, that's us like taking a stand against insufficient consideration in our relationships. Because if you don't consider, or you're not being considerate of one another in a relationship, you're going to just not be in a good spot. It's not going to be clear. Everybody's going to be confused. It'll just be, it's not, you won't be in a good spot. I think that communication is key in a relationship. Like, you can't have a good relationship with somebody if you don't communicate well. Treigh and I have definitely had to grow in communication, me especially. Growing up, in my family life and things like that, like, communication wasn't really a big thing. We didn't talk about a lot. And so it was like we never really knew how one another was doing. And like, if we weren't doing well, you weren't allowed to talk about it. And so when we got married, that was a really big thing that I had to learn to do, was just communicate my thoughts, my feelings, everything I didn't want to talk about, to communicate it, because otherwise we wouldn't have a healthy relationship. And so I think communication is everything in a relationship.
I think that's why, like, I opened up with I love and hate it at the same time, because it's so in the forefront. There's no day you can go without communicating, really. Like, unless you're by yourself, and even then, you're communicating with the Holy Spirit. You're communicating, people are communicating with you, like, whether or not you're actively participating or not, it's just constantly around us. And so if you don't choose to be authentic and like really dig into what God's version of that looks like, healthy communication, it's constantly berating you with how much you are not doing it. But at the same time, it's, I think good leaders take that, and each moment they use applied knowledge for the next scenario. So it's something that will be exposed quickly if you're not doing well, but you have so many opportunities to keep doing better. And it's like, okay, if Morgan and I have a conversation and I learn how to communicate with her, or where maybe it causes me to look inward and say like, oh, because I didn't share on my heart, it like, we weren't working in a common goal and that didn't get accomplished. Or our relationship was damaged, or it's just really important to take it daily and relationshiply, if that's a word, like specific to our relationship, and apply it and ask God, like, does this apply anywhere else? And how do I grow as a leader, and like applying it constantly. I was talking to Katie, and she shared like, this is a safeguard for offense. So if we are communicating clearly, it keeps a safeguard to not have offense in our heart. We get to say that, we're safeguarding against offense, against attack. We're not assuming something. When you shared that about hastily inconsiderate, being inconsiderate, is I'm assuming what you think and feel if I don't ask you. So it takes an active asking and searching. And I think it's interesting that the Lord set it up that way. Like he wants us to seek each other out, seek him out, and commune with him. when we find that word, like commune is hidden in the word communication.
Yeah.
So everything we believe about our relationship with the Lord, with the new covenant, like it was unto be able to communicate without obstruction, to sit down. When I think about communication, I think it's really most effective when we're without distraction, like me and you sitting down without distraction, full focus, and like clearly communicating what's going on.
The funny thing about the word commune too is that it means to share your intimate thoughts and feelings with another. I was learning that when I was reading about adoration, actually, which is really interesting. But to communicate and to commune with someone is to share your thoughts and your feelings. And that's how it is with the Lord. To commune with the Lord is it's like a two-way conversation. And so,
So good. All right, I want to read one more verse. So James 1:19 talks about being quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. And so it's interesting. It basically says that man's anger doesn't produce God's righteousness. So if we are too quick to speak and not quick to listen, again, what the value is downshift, to slow down and listen and communicate clearly, then we're not producing what is pleasing to the Lord. It's doing what we think is the right thing, and it's very one-minded and one-tracked, and we're not in unity with Holy Spirit. So, like we said, it's rooted in unity, honor, how we love one another. Can you guys speak from a creative's perspective? How have you seen communication or a lack of communication impact like creatives, a project, a process? What does that look like in the creative space to operate in communication really well or to not do that well? How it's impacted things you've been on personally, shoots or relationships.
One thing I've kind of noticed, just to like open this conversation up, is like there's a lot of people walking away from the church and, you know, creative expressions in the church. There's a lot of outward spoken hurt. And, you know, obviously with different churches and even just creative organizations and whatnot. And, you know, I'm sure a lot of that comes from a lack of communication, either up front or after. And I think that just shows, like, when you're not communicating well, like, what can happen, and doing it on the front end. And really, we say clarifying, downshifting, so we can communicate effectively, and really clarifying what's going on and getting on the same page. And I think as creatives, it's super, super important, because what we do, we have gifts that we're stewarding from the Lord, and it can feel very personal. So if we aren't communicating well, and we've got like plenty of together instances, you know, we can get more specific with like how to steward this, but you know, it kind of hurts to see a lot of people walking away, you know, like they have bad moments in the creative industry or filmmaking or whatever, so they're like, I'm gonna just walk away and give that up. Or even walking away from the church or being a creative within the church. I'm going to just go to the world because, you know, the world will treat me like this, and at least they'll be honest with me. You know, I've seen some of that. So I think it's just safe I say that to just reiterate the importance of like why we need to really communicate well, being creatives in the church or outside. So
it's good.
Yeah, it makes me think of just instances that I've been in and that I know like I've had to grow out of, you know, just like you're talking about being in like the church world and like the creativity that's there, and there's so much talent and different expressions that come out of the church, and then for whatever reason that seems like a lot of times move away and get pulled into the world. I think one of the things I see consistently is like in those situations, there's this desire on the creative side to, you know, operate in excellence and deliver something that's like, whether it's like their pastor or a leader or even just a client, like they want to deliver something in excellence. They want to do a great job. We all do. But they hold back on asking those questions for clarity. And they feel like the person trusts them, and they need to use their creativity, and they need to be smart enough to figure out what this leader is wanting or what the client is wanting, rather than taking the time to slow down and ask those questions. And I think there's not like there's a fault on one side or the other, but like one of the things I've seen from leaders in my past is like when you do step up and ask those questions, they interpret it as like you're being like you're coming against them. Like you're not trusting them.
Like questioning.
Yeah, like you're questioning their vision or something like that. And I feel like now I just want to get clarity. Like I don't want to miss the mark. Like I know I'm going to get feedback on the first round, but I don't want to be so far off that it just causes that frustration like you were talking about. One time I was talking with Ben Meckel about communication, and he said to me like this revelation that I had not thought of or seen it before, but like at some point in the process of a project, like the downshift is going to happen, one way or the other, whether we control it at the beginning and we downshift and talk about it and get on the same page, or we run down that road too fast, we go in the wrong direction, and now we have to stop, we have to slow down because we've missed the mark, we've gotten it wrong, and we have to back up, and now we're not moving forward, we're literally moving backwards, taking steps backwards, starting over. And it causes frustration, it causes hurt, and that's where I've seen it be like, I don't want to say abused, but like just not used well,
not stewarded,
not stewarded well.
Absolutely.
But on the other side of it, I've seen so many times, and it's part of it is like me growing and being more mature and growing into leadership and being able to take the things that I see the Lord showing me and know how to communicate it out so that when I'm leading a team or I'm leading a project, I can be confident, not prideful, but I can be confident in knowing like what the Lord has shown me, and I can give direction, and I can bring vision, and I can bring clarity so that people feel empowered and they know that they can run fast, and not like they have to try to guess what I'm thinking or guess like, you know, there's so many times where it's like, I'll hear people say like, well, I didn't want to stifle creativity. It's like, but if you had a vision from the Lord, totally, I want to know what that vision was because I want to partner with it. I don't want to have to try to have my own vision and hope that it matches up with yours. Because like it
Most
might
of the
not.
time it won't.
If it does, that's great. But like I've not seen that happen very often.
So
unless we get into the room together and talk about it. Then I can catch on to that vision and I can partner with it. And I can then take it into my daily encounters and I can grow with it, and it can and I can add to it what and that's where you're wanting to like not stifle my creativity is like me being able to add to the vision because I have like a creative gift that this person might not have.
Yeah, I think you hit on something so awesome I want to come to and talk about with you all is that tension of creatives being like, I think there's this thing we all know of creatives straying away from the very practical, real, like tangible things because we're visionaries and we want to do this project and it's like this dream or idea. And so I want to talk about that. Like there is such a refreshing in just making it plain, right? It says in the word that without vision, people perish and they will cast off restraint. Like when you get clear direction and communication, it's like refreshing. It's like, oh my gosh, yes. Like, okay, we know where we're going. It's clear. And so I want to hit, it's just so practical. Like, tell everyone when, what time, what exactly did you mean? Like, let's be really clear. And when those questions come up, like you're saying, I love how you shared, like, it's not we share out of fear of man. We don't hold back our questions, but even in how you word your questions, like that's a part of communication. Like, hey, I want to slow down. And that's what I love about our culture is we have language. We can say, hey, can we downshift? That whole thing, when we say, hey, can I downshift with you? It's communicating. I want to slow down to communicate clearly today so we can move forward faster tomorrow. Like it expresses the heart of, hey, I care about this. I care about you. And I care about our effectiveness in the kingdom. And I want to take a second to make sure we're on the same page. And so I would just say really practically as creatives, think about the who, what, where, when, why, how. Like if you're going to voice something, make sure you've communicated those details, especially for projects or events or things that you're collaborating with people on. Take that to the Lord. Like make sure you've asked him, okay, who do you want to be there? How do you want us to do it? When? Is it now? Is it an all day? Like very practically just getting those details answered and making it clear and effective for people. I think too, we see like just cutting out the things that could be convoluted or unclear, making our language, like we're asking the Lord to sharpen all of that in us. But we get that through the experience of doing it together. And so as a creative, I think it's really important to not just say, oh yeah, I live in this ethereal place where we can just do projects and we'll figure it out when we get there. Like, no, if you can, ask the Lord for those things, everything you can prepare for. Something I love is as you prepare for something, you can be more present when that thing's happening.
Yeah.
You're not distracted. Like you're saying, like you will be forced to downshift if you haven't yet. And so those are the moments where if we don't downshift, what happens? Your gears like grind, they hit. There's not a smooth ride if you're not downshifting.
Right. Right.
And so it's causing hurt, it's causing brokenness, it's causing inefficiency. So
I think it's really important to, like, for creatives, like, we can get really caught up in the craft, what we do, you know? So I want to learn how to operate a camera. I want to learn how to design. And so everything is going to go into that. But like, communication really is a skill that we all need to grow in. It's something I'm like personally trying to grow in so much. And I like have to remind myself that it's not like I need to build that. I need to feed this thing. I need to get better with how I communicate verbally in every sense of that. And if we're working on a project and we don't have clarity, how are you supposed to clearly like depict a lack of clarity? You know what I mean? Like, there's no way. You don't have the information. The information's not in the video. And I think we just need like an awareness. Like, I think some creatives don't, for one, have an environment where this is a value. So they just live there. They don't know what good communication's like. They don't know what bad communication's like. And I'm sure there's like this association with the craft and with the, you know, this is just how church media, or this is just how being a creative in the world has to be. But it's something we need to grow in. I think you need to just pursue, you know, even like AXL, organizations or people or groups of people who know and who can help you get there, or even just know what it feels like. Morgan and I and some other team members here at Mercy Culture, we were going and doing worship at an event recently. And we just didn't know fully what the event was about. And, you know, we got on the website.
Not at all,
it
just
wasn't, you know, and we're there, and, you know.
We had no idea why we were there.
I say this because there's parallels being an editor or a filmmaker, whatever we do.
Yeah.
And, you know, you're getting into the project. You're like, okay, like I kind of know where we want to go, but I don't know why. And these should be red flags. But if you don't know, you don't know.
Right.
So why would you proceed? And we're getting through, and, you know, it wasn't until after we did our thing and there was a post interview where we really caught the whole point of the event and realized there really is a conflict of interest at that moment, you know. And I'm not saying this to portray anything bad. My point is, you know, that right there, that tension as a creative, those should all like be indicators that you need to downshift, and we need to communicate when you don't understand, when you're not on the same page, or you have questions. And I say that to the person who's in an unhealthy environment. And I grew up in an unhealthy family unit. I grew up in an unhealthy church unit at times. And it's something I'm learning, okay, what are red flags? What are indicators that I need to downshift? And, you know, this is something as a creative I'm really going after and trying to grow in, you know.
Yeah, I love that, Treigh. I think it's important to note, even if you are in an unhealthy space, you're still in control of being able to be an effective communicator yourself. And so you can still, no matter what, hold your own standard in your life, the things you have power and authority over. And I truly believe God honors that. Like, even if you're in an environment where it's maybe not clear from leadership or family units or churches or whatever that looks like, you are still, we say something here like communication is your responsibility. You can't sit back and wait for communication to be made clear to you or have these excuses. Like, when there's unclarity, it's your job to seek it out. And you're not responsible for how that person responds, but you are responsible to seek it out. And I think so many times that's when we get the beautiful part of restoring relationships or making something better than it was before, is because you get to voice. I think we're all in so many environments where people, even if they're not effective communicators, they care and value your heart. And so when you just downshift and say, I feel, what was that word you used? The haste and inconsiderate. That's the word. Like, if you can really share that, hey, I feel like you're not considering how this affects me or how this affects our department or our project or me as a person, the relational side. it's just so important to share it.
Yeah.
Even if you're not in a healthy space, you still have the ability to get out of that in your own power, you know? So yeah.
One thing that Pastor Jess said the other day, kind of clarifying the heart of the downshift, and I feel like I grew hearing this, but I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on this. She was talking about the point of a downshift. And, you know, obviously we say to slow down so we can go faster, but I think, you know, in immaturity sometimes, you know, I would downshift and it wasn't to go somewhere faster and it could derail. Like obviously in the creative industry, like we have things we need to deliver by, you know, a date, a time. And, you know, you can get around leaders that are growing in this and like, you know, they're using the downshift, but it's like, it really is like halting the project. And obviously I think it's really important, like to understand why we do it. It truly is to get there quicker. The heart of it isn't to, you know, self-destruct the project or, you know, to ruin momentum.
Yeah.
And it's to build trust, to grow with the person. It's not to be like, I don't trust you. I don't want to do this. Like, you know what I mean? That's not the heart of it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of cultures reject the downshift in the communication because it can be seen as like you're, like you said, Chris, like you're questioning authority.
Yeah, pushing
and it's
back.
like you're about to like blow the thing up and you guys can't move forward, but it's like, no, this helps us move forward. And that, I think you're so good at, Chris, of like clarifying your heart and really in that James 1:19, it talks about like, it's kind of talking about communication and quick to listen.
Yeah.
Chris does an incredible job at listening and that being a part of your communication, and you'll come back with a solution as a creative that's so strong and so helpful and solves the problem because you're listening and you're not just halting the project and saying everything from your end, but truly the exchange, it's an exchange. I really admire that about you.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah. I feel like a lot with communication, in order to communicate well, I feel like I have learned that I need to ask the Lord for wisdom. I know that sounds really simple, but the, what is it? It's Colossians 4:5-6. It says, walk in wisdom toward outsiders, making the best use of the time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, which I was like reading means wisdom and wit and things like that, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. And so like in those scenarios with like what you're saying with Chris, like taking the time to listen and not being too quick to respond, even if you don't have an answer, and like ask the Lord for wisdom and how you're supposed to answer each individual person and how to respond in every scenario, I think is really, really key to communicating well. And it genuinely comes down to like asking the Lord for wisdom in every scenario and assuming that he really wants to speak about every moment and every interaction that you have.
Yeah.
So good.
I think that's so important to recognize, especially in today's environment with social media and how like just how fast everything moves. And it's so easy to just see a comment or a post and just want to fire right back with whatever is on your mind.
Totally.
And not slow down and like ask the Lord, like, what is actually the wise thing to say?
Yes.
And I've noticed that like with our team here at Mercy Culture, I get to lead the communications department, and you know, so we steward all of the external communications, and we work really hard to make sure that what we communicate to the public and to the congregation or to the serve team is done in excellence and it's done with clarity, because we don't want to confuse people. Like we want to be clear in our communication. We want people to know where to go and what time to be there and what's going on and what to expect. But on the other side of it, for us internally, it's so easy for us to just rattle off a reply to a Slack and not think about like how the other side is going to receive that. And so as a communications department, like I've been challenging our team members to like lead in communication. Like, yes, we steward all the external communication, but as communications is a department of our house, it's also a value of our house, and we should lead in that.
That's so good.
And when I was talking to Fallon about that one time, she was like, wouldn't it be so funny if we had like an empowerment department? Or what if we had like a trust department? It's like thinking about like what would be their responsibility and like what would we all look to for that department to lead in that value. And so for us, like it's so practical to just put that into our department. But I think as creatives, and we're always putting everything out there onto the internet, and we're constantly aware of what people are thinking and what we're thinking about ourselves, and to just take the time to like slow down and ask the Lord for wisdom before we just reply to a text or reply to a Slack, whether it has to do with your work or whether it just has to do with, you know, it's your wife or it's your spouse or a sibling or a friend or whatever, and however they're interacting with you, and you, instead of just like, because of whatever is frustrating you in the moment or because of whatever they have no context of, you just reply in haste, and it can break trust, it can hurt feelings, and you just cause confusion.
Yeah, and how often do we like evolve and change, right? Like the world is moving so fast, and that place of technology has created a spot where all of us can communicate anything we want at any point in time. But like, how many times do we change how we feel about it the next day? Like taking
when
time
there's
to
more information.
Right. There's so much that can get crazy fast when you don't have all the information. You can build a whole belief system about something because you missed one integral part. Like you can totally write someone off, cancel them, and you're like, oh, that was like a typo, or like we forgot to share this part, or I thought I sent you this, but I didn't. Like how many times has that damaged a relationship? And our humanity is so quick to build up these cases or like offense again, just because we didn't get the fullness of what they were trying to communicate. And so it's very important, like you're saying, to do it the kingdom way, which is slow down, and communicate clearly. And I love that. Really, I want to ask you guys, we already kind of are in this vein, but what has God's nature taught us about how to communicate with other people? How has he communicated with you? Like, what have you learned in your spiritual journey of growing in spiritual maturity? Maybe for me, I know I used to just be a lot more intense and harsh, I guess I would say. I got that word a lot, aggressive, and it's because, I've learned like I'm very passionate about clarity because I love all the things we're talking about. That's where it comes from.
You're a master, Cheyenne.
You're the best.
Thank you, guys. But in my immaturity, it used to just come out. It was just rude or mean. Like I would just be so quick to only be one-sided, not consider others, and just share like, well, this is just true or facts. Like, why are you?
This is the truth.
Like, this is the right way, and right. And you learn that that was selfish, and it was. I was only looking at my perspective, and so what I've learned from the Lord is the gracious, right? Being gracious with how we speak, and what is grace is like, yes, it's supernatural empowerment to overcome things. So even in that, it's assuming the best in people first, and giving them, instead of assuming, they're against you or their idea divides your idea, like it's assuming we're in unity, we love each other, we're all one in the spirit. So I've just had to learn how to really grow in patience in how I communicate, and not assuming that others are not in the same vein as me. Just sharing heart and choosing really to look at the Father's nature, which is kind and patient. And so I'd love to hear from some of y'all, like your experience in growing in communication. Chris, you're a father, so I don't know if you can speak from that perspective. Like, what has fatherhood taught you about this? And
that's good. When you were talking, it just made me think of. I forget where it is in Proverbs, but it says like when the first man speaks, he sounds right until you hear the second opinion. And as I was processing, I was like, why did you show me that right now? And I felt like he was saying like, sometimes the first person is myself, and like I hear like what I think is right, and I'm just like, this is right. Like, what is this person? They're not even paying attention to me. But if I don't listen to them as the second person, like I'm not going to get the context of what they have to say and understand where they're coming from. So I would say as a father, I've got 3 kids. My son he's our oldest, and he's about to turn 10. And with him, like there's just a lot of need to clarify with him and just make sure he knows what my expectations are. And sometimes that does mean like, I can't just say, hey, do X, Y, Z, or give him a list of 5 things because, he's 10 years old, and 5 things you can only keep one of them in his head. And then he does the one when he's off to, play on the trampoline or whatever. And I'm like, why didn't you do these other things? Oh, I forgot. It's like, okay, how do I help you remember? And like, so sometimes I'll ask him to like repeat things back to me so I can make sure I know what he's hearing. So and sometimes it's not even just the matter of like the practical, like list things, but it's like, okay, repeat back to me what you heard.
What did you hear me say?
Like, there's a level of feedback in there, but like me knowing what he heard helps me know how I can communicate it better.
That's so
the
great.
next time. If he heard it wrong, then I can't be that frustrated because I should be learning how he's hearing things, and I should be knowing that my communication isn't actually effective for him. And so I have to make adjustments and learn him. And, that's not just something I would apply to, like, that's a practical example with my son. But that's something that I will have, like, if I'm having a conversation with somebody, I've gotten into the practice of like wanting to make sure, and not in a rude way. I'm not being dishonoring, like, all right, Cheyenne, like repeat back to me. I said,
what if
it was just like, okay, like I want to make sure my, like, that my heart was heard clearly. So like, let me know what you heard. Because if you heard it wrong, I want to clarify.
That's
so
great.
Good. Such a great leadership tool. It's helped so many times. That question has helped save like frustration and just tension in I think a lot of times, like you're saying, we are the first man in that Proverbs scenario. We're like, yeah, I said it. It was so clear, and it's just not. And so we have to be aware of how it's being perceived, because the Lord wants to do something in us in those moments. As we're communicating, it's this like, we have to be quick to evolve and adapt what we've shared. And it's interesting because it's like a creative expression of like, okay, I have to find another way to say this because the way I said it the first time wasn't how I thought. Like that's the best way I captured it. But I need to like evolve as a creative in who I'm speaking to and how it affects them.
That's
really good.
Earlier you asked about like what does it look like when God communicates with us? And when you gave us that prompt, like before we started thinking about like, okay, what is it like when I think about communication in the Bible, like what's the first thing that comes to my mind? The first two instances were like Moses in the burning bush, and then when Jesus sends out the disciples 2 by 2. And like both times it's like, it's just very clear, like, all right, here's what I want you to do. These are the steps I want you to take. And like the like haziness of it comes from like Moses, and he's like, I don't know if I can do that. Like, are you sure I'm the right person?
Right.
And he's like, come on, I'm telling you, like, I've picked you. Like,
I will go with you. Yes.
Yeah. And then with Jesus, like, he literally just gives them this to-do list almost of like, all right, you're going to go out. Don't bring any money. Don't bring any food. Go to these houses. If they don't like what you're saying, just dust off your feet and walk away.
Come on,
And it's just like, okay, there's like, and so really what it comes down to is like, that's empowerment. And with empowerment, there's a need for communication so that you can set the person up to run faster. And so like following off of those examples, like we've been saying, like just to make it plain, like Jesus didn't like break down like, okay, if this happens, then you want to have this scripture ready, and it's just like tells them like, these are the things you need to know. Just go out, and then if there's a need to like downshift farther, we can do that. But here's the things you need to know. Move forward as far as you can. And then when you can't move forward anymore, like let's see what else we need to talk about.
Treigh and Morgan, can you speak into it from your perspective in your marriage? Like, how has communication grown you individually? How has God impacted how you've changed and evolved in that? Like in your early days, you guys have been dating, married quite a while.
Not 4 years. You've known us the whole time.
Well, we've been together 8 years.
We've been together 8 years now.
Technically,
So as you've spiritually matured and gotten God's heart, how has that affected how you communicate together?
A lot of the more I mature and grow with the Lord, and by no means am I saying this is the only way, I'm finding in my time with the Lord, there's a lot more listening. And it doesn't mean I don't talk to God and pour my heart out. Lately, to be really specific, it looks like me meditating on the Word and even Psalms. And there's this like, I think the Psalms are super creative. They convey this strong emotion, and I can like kind of attach. I'm like, like my heart feels that. Instead of me having to do it, sometimes it's nice to be like, it's in the Word, it's there, it's conveying it in just such a beautiful way, obviously written by the Holy Spirit. And then I am just listening to the Lord. And I think I'm trying to get into the practice of like listening better, growing, and even as a son to the Father and as a husband. Whenever we're butting heads or in scenarios, instead of me just like trying to fix the whole thing, fix me, fix her,
That's
put
a lot of the problem,
a 2-year plan together, how we're going to fix everything. It's like really listening, because a lot of times I'll be addressing the wrong thing. And Morganne can probably get more specific with that. But I think as creatives, as sons and daughters, period, we can grow in listening. And obviously in that James scripture, the Lord is being very specific with what we need to do, and being slow to speak and quick to listen is,
that's
God's heart.
Everything. I feel like, I'm growing in that as well, being quick to listen and slow to speak, because I can just rattle off responses all day long that like could be hurtful, or could be, I have no filter and I'm just saying the first thing that comes to my mind because I'm mad at you or something like that. And it's not from a place of love or wisdom, or asking the Lord like how I should respond in order to grow closer to you and like deepen our relationship. So I think, it all comes back really to that. Like I'm learning to shut my mouth a lot of times. Like that is what it requires a lot of the time. But then also I feel like with the Lord, He's teaching me that I don't have to be afraid of asking questions. I think for a long time, I just will take things for what they are instead of asking questions, and allowing myself to know you more, like in our marriage. Like if I don't ask any questions, like, why are you feeling this way? Or why he's talking about something and I don't ask any questions, I'm not going to dig deeper into that, and it will just stay surface level. It'll just be what he said, instead of asking leading questions that will help us both get to where we want to be and grow closer and all of those things. And so me with the Lord, I am learning to not be afraid to ask questions with the Lord, and not be afraid to ask questions with you. And so I think that's like a big thing.
It's been really important too, because we do create together.
Yeah.
So I can find like the creative, I feel like just even workflow of creativity outside of the church, and what our church specifically is stewarding is so, like we've talked about it, anti-marriage, anti-family, anti-purity. We were talking about it in the last episode.
Yeah.
And like the workflows, it's like this grind culture. We don't Sabbath, we don't rest, we don't downshift, we don't communicate, and it's not healthy. So I found in like when we're going to create, we have to be really intentional with our, communication and making sure we're on the same page, because whatever we're going to be creating isn't going to convey unity. We're not going to get there. Like if we don't steward, these values that we're hitting, and communication being one of them. Yeah. And it's just, I feel like the attack of the enemy on us being married and creating is like, don't slow down because you need to get the product out, or you need to finish this song or this piece, and you got to turn it in. So our priority immediately goes to, at all costs, do it. But then we're not Sabbathing, we're not communicating, we're not in unity, we're not living in purity. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And as a creative, that is just the lie, and I feel like it stifles us.
Yeah.
And our commitment is now at just like the end product rather than the process, and doing it together. And that's something we really have to watch, when we're leading worship together or writing something, and I found myself just rattling off really sharp things because my priority is like, we got to get this done. It's not you, it's not us being on the same page. And I'll do that. Recently did that. She was singing something and she got off the click, and I was like, Morgan, get on the click. And I was like, what am I doing?
He was music directing, and I'm like, excuse me.
She's in charge, really.
I was like the worship leader, and he's just like, I'm like, excuse me.
And I'm just cracking her. And I literally was like, she's the one in charge right now. What am I doing?
Yeah.
But it was like something, honestly, I should have downshifted with her So she's singing and worship leading, and I'm directing the band. And there was a question I should have asked her that I didn't. So now I'm being harsh with her in the moment because I never clarified what we need as a band and what I need. So instead of me being like, Morgan, come in now, I'm like, Morgan, get it together.
No,
You know what I
that's
mean?
not what I want
And it
to
was
do.
dishonoring. It was dishonoring. And she looked at me,
Right.
and I looked around, and everyone was like, Pastor Ryan looked at me, and I was like, what am I doing?
That's so
It was a
beautiful.
bad leadership moment. It was that's a very
Thank you
small
for sharing
moment,
the
but
practical, like that side helps so much to not just assume like Treigh and Morgan have it together because
Oh my
they're
gosh,
worship leading,
definitely
or
not.
creatives, have it together because this product,
Yeah.
man, I think that we don't even have time to go into all of that, but so much of creative can look put together on the outside. But if the process in which it happened was damaging and hurtful or, it just becomes non-effective, right?
Exactly.
It becomes this facade of, this thing we did was so awesome, but it's not going to have lasting fruit.
Yeah.
What does last is if we are intentional about slowing down and building healthy relationships, communicating clearly. It's building something that lasts and is eternal and will yield fruit. And so ultimately, as we're sharing, like the biggest takeaway I think is even knowing if we don't catch the Father's heart in communion with Him, we are going to be ineffective in how we communicate with others. Thank you guys for sharing. This has been such a beautiful conversation around catching God's heart on communication and being effective in how we do that. Amen.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the AXL Podcast. Make sure to subscribe and stay up to date with everything that's going on. For more information, visit axlcreativeco.com or follow us on all socials at AXL Creative Co. We'll see you next time.